Say that
Recording in progress.
wherever you're coming from, it's still morning. 8 o'clock here on the Pacific Coast. Maybe late morning for some of you. We welcome you to our last webinar of the season and semester and year. And we're super excited to have Dr. Glover here. But as I am introducing and handing things off to her, let me first say my name is Dr. Andra Davis, and I'm one of the co-investigators with my colleague, Dr. Lippy here. There's something going on with my computer such that if my mic is open and your mic is open, there's echoing. So I'm going to just introduce and put my mic on mute and hand it over. But while we're getting folks are arriving, would you mind putting in the chat where you're coming from? And if this is your first webinar, we love to see all the places people are coming from. I think last month we had somebody actually all the way from Australia, if I'm remembering that right. So with that, welcome everybody. Happy December. Happy busy time of the semester for all of us. And as I said, Dr. Tony Glover is here today to take us on a little journey looking at RN-BSN programs. So it's a unique audience today. If you have one of those programs, we're so happy that you're here. Dr. Glover is a professor at Oakland University School of Nursing, and she is a distinguished educator in gerontological nursing. And she's one of the folks that have been with us on our summer workshops for the last 2 years. So she's going to tell you more about that a little bit later. With that, I'm going to mute and take it over, Dr. Glover.
Well, thank you. And hopefully everyone can see the slides that are shared on the screen. And I believe Andrea is also going to put a link to the PowerPoint slides in the chat box so that you can open them on your own computer if you wish, because some of the links in the slides may work best if you have a copy on your own computer. So I am very happy to be here and talk about this topic. I am going to go ahead and advance my slide, hopefully. Yeah, okay. So the objectives of this session are to discuss ways to integrate primary palliative care content into RN-BSN education, especially in an online environment, and then to share some of the learning activities that I have developed. I've been an educator since 2013, and so some of the tools that I have developed over that time, and to share some student feedback about using the LNIC program. And so during this webinar, I welcome your feedback. So if you want to raise your hand and, ask a question or have something to discuss, feel free to do that. You can also put something in the chat box, and Dr. Davis and Dr. Lippy will be monitoring that to make sure I don't miss anything. So for the slides, I have added links to all the learning activities and all the documents, and I've checked them twice to make sure they work. But if they don't work for you, just feel free to, email me after my email address is on the first slide, or if you have additional questions that you want to kind of ask offline, you can also feel free to email me. So let's see. So when we were discussing this webinar, Dr. Lippy actually sent me this national RN-BSN faculty forum report. And I've summarized a couple things from that report that I found interesting. If any of you have been educators for a while, you probably remember that the Robert Wood Johnson had an initiative in the early 2000s about having 80% of all nurses have their baccalaureate degree by 2020. And we're not yet at that goal. It's 2025, and we're nationally, it's about 70% of nurses who have their baccalaureate degree. And RN-BSN programs account for about 20%, 26% of all baccalaureate or pre-license or baccalaureate students, not pre-licensure, because they're already licensed. And this report discusses how RN-BSN programs can serve as an educational bridge to make sure that nurses get all the competencies, the AACN competencies and things like that. So when I talk to our board of visitors, I'm in Rochester, Michigan, pretty urban, suburban area, but around a lot of urban hospitals. And when I talk to our board of visitors, they say they've met the 80% goal of nurses with their baccalaureate degree. But when you look at rural areas, which we have in our state, many rural areas, that's where we need additional focus and work to achieve that Robert Wood Johnson objective. So the report also uses this Miller's Pyramid of Clinical Competence, which I have to admit I wasn't aware of before reading this report. But what I like about it is just the focus on, we want students to not only know knowledge, but then to know how to apply that knowledge, to then show how to apply that knowledge, and then to do it in practice. And I think when you're thinking about RN-BSN education, you have to think creatively about how you're going to have students demonstrate their knowledge in a completely online asynchronous program. And that's something that we all work on and continue to work on. So I have, some ideas about that I'll share, but I also, want to hear from folks that are working with these issues as well of how to measure competence. So just a little bit about our program. We have an RN-BSN program, and I have taught in that program consistently since 2018. I would say that the majority of students that come into our RN-BSN program have been in practice for less than a year. Most often they've been in practice for only 3 to 6 months. So they're fairly new in their professional practice. And most students report in their ADN programs, they may have covered some issues related to palliative and end-of-life care, such as recognizing symptoms of approaching death or possibly even post-mortem care, but they need support with their communication skills and their advocacy for patients with palliative care needs, and then proactive symptom management. And what I always find amazing in the course I teach is, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I have an assignment about caring for a dying patient. And even though these nurses have been in practice for such a short period of time, my experience over and over and over again is that almost all of the students have already cared for a dying patient. And most of the time they report they didn't feel prepared to do that, either educationally or emotionally. So in RN-BSN programs, I think we want to, focus on what those students need in terms of their primary palliative care skills. So does anyone, this is maybe a good time to just do a check-in and see if anyone has any questions, anyone has any RN-BSN students with completely different needs, or anything anyone want to share at this point? All right, so
Dr. Baker, I think Dr. Davis had her hand raised, so if
oh,
you want to mute so she can unmute. Yeah.
I'm muted.
Okay, yeah, I did see there's a comment also in the chat, but I was just wondering, Tony, if you have a sense, since I used to teach this population when I was at a different university, but I don't anymore, and I'm just wondering if over time, if you've noticed that any of them are coming in with some, or maybe they do the LNEC modules in the pre-licensure program, or are you seeing any shift at all?
I've only oh, I've only had one student in I think the last, 7 or 8 years, who came in and said, I did ELNIC as part of my ADN program. And I've probably taught thousands of students. So it's still pretty unusual. And in fact, I actually had a grant where I was trying to move ELNIC to the community college level, and just faced a lot of problems with recruitment, giving away the ELNIC program for free, and of just recruiting community colleges to participate. And I don't know if that's just because, faculty feel their programs are so full and they just don't have the time to insert something in there. But yeah, I mean, I think more and more schools are using ELNIC, and I think that's a great place to start. And so, like we discussed at the summer workshop this past summer, that if you're going to start with something, my recommendation is start with ELNIC. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So let me go ahead. And so these are the CARES competencies, and in that highlighted link at the top will take you to the CARES document. If you don't have that, probably most folks are already familiar with this. And then if you think about primary palliative care education, we are mostly focused on the AACN essential of Domain 2, which is person-centered care, and the concept of communication. So communicating effectively with our patients and their families, considering individual beliefs and values in our communication approach. So I'm just going to share that here. And then the AACN is now, if you haven't seen it already, they are in the process of publishing their progression indicators, which will be helpful to schools out there in terms of measuring those student competencies. And it kind of goes back to that Miller's clinical competence triangle of, does the student know the information? Do they know how, or shows how, and can they demonstrate it? So what we've been talking about in our curriculum is we're working on our mapping, because we've revised our curriculum to be more competency based, and now we're remapping our curriculum to make sure that we're covering it. And probably like most of you, we want to show where the concept is first introduced, where it's reinforced, and where the student demonstrates that skill. So for the remainder of the slides, I'm going to focus on a lot of assignments that I have used, and some suggestions about how to use those assignments. So again, feel free to pop in with any questions. And as I mentioned earlier, I recommend everyone start with ELNIC. So I would love to just see like a show of hands, or maybe place a comment in the comment box of how many folks are actually using the ELNIC undergraduate curriculum in their program, and having students do that curriculum.
And Dr. Glover, while people are raising their hands, wonder if you might sort of just offer a short context of if your program is mostly face-to-face or online, or maybe as you go through the strategies, which ones you might think which might work either way, or just sort of, because I don't know, I know we have a mix, I think, of programs, but curious about the online piece.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lippy. Yeah, so our program, our RN-BSN program, is completely online and completely asynchronous. So when we were creating the program, those were some of the requirements to make sure the program was workable for working nurses. And so we cannot schedule any in-person meetings or simulation type, strategies. Everything has to be done in an online asynchronous environment. So I use a lot of self-reflection as a tool, and you're about to see an example of that in how to use the ELNIC feedback to look at competency So let me go ahead and so I want to just look at the chat box and see.
People
Okay.
are great. They're sharing ways in which they're using it. Sorry, yeah, so lots of comments about some programs are integrating the modules into their ADN curricula. So we are seeing some students coming to the RN to BSN programs with that training. And then some individuals are sharing where they're embedding those modules within the courses. I haven't seen any questions yet. There is one comment about the lack of faculty preparation to teach palliative care, which we can absolutely visit because we have some strategies for that too, but we'll defer those to the end.
Yeah, and I'll just give you a highlight. The registration for the next summer workshop will be opening, I believe, in January. So if you haven't attended a summer workshop, please consider applying. And it's a wonderful program where most of the costs of your travel, except your travel to get there, are supported. And the summer workshop has been really wonderful. Couple days to just think about these topics in greater detail. So um, I always say, like start where you are. So with like when I first came to Oakland University, we did not have ELNIC in our curriculum. And so I applied for a small internal grant, which I just used that money. It was $10,000. I used that money to purchase a bunch of ELNIC tokens, and I gave them for to for free to students in the RN-BSN program, and then we worked on getting it in our traditional BSN program and for the ASD students. And so it's often easier, like if you give away something for free first before you make it a requirement of the curriculum. And then once those tokens ran out, what we did is we reviewed our books, our required books, and we really didn't need a book for one of the classes. So we got rid of a $80 textbook and asked students to instead register for the ELNIC program. So that is one strategy. If there are internal funding sources of small grants that you can use if you haven't begun to use ELNIC in your programs. And some faculty, they have ELNIC in an elective class. It's my personal viewpoint that the ELNIC is kind of the primary content that all baccalaureate students need. And then you can put other content into elective classes on palliative care if that's the goal. But ideally, you want all baccalaureate students to receive the ELNIC content. And so I'm going to try this link and see if it works because I've embedded some of my assignments. So let's see if this will open. Oh, it didn't open. Okay. Well, these Word document, the little icon for the Word document is actually a Word document that shows how I ask for feedback about the ELNIC program from students. They give me their certificates, and then they have a little Word document where I ask for feedback. And I just want to share, I went too far. So this is an example of student feedback that I had from last semester. And of course, this I consider exemplary response. So not everyone writes to this level, but it will certainly give you ideas for how you can use something like a feedback tool to assess competency. So I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but this was from a student. And basically I just asked students, what did you think of the ELNIC program and how will you use it in your practice? And that's the basis of it. And so this student said ELNIC provided her with practical tools and clear ways to act. So it's definitely getting at that demonstration of a skill, right? Which is sometimes the hardest part to do in an online asynchronous program. And then she demonstrates her knowledge of a communication mnemonic by appropriately describing the ask, tell, ask method. And she also references the use of the patient dignity questionnaire, which is, what do I need to know about you to provide the best possible care? A question that all of our nurses should be asking their patients. And she actually mentioned, asking this type of question allowed me to provide more compassionate and patient-centered care, which is the domain, right? This is what we want students to be able to do if they're achieving that competency on person-centered care. And then in her next paragraph that begins with the word additionally, she really goes into detail about an experience with terminal extubation, where there are several examples of her demonstrating the competency of, sitting down to talk to the patient's husband, explaining what was going on with the dying process and what was being done to keep the patient comfortable, and how she supported, the spouse in this situation. And she also beautifully mentions in the beginning how she now uses silence in her practice in terms of interacting with patients and families. And so she concludes by just saying, overall, Elnick has made my practice more honest, direct, and human, calm and human. So this is just a really, simple example of asking for feedback, but you could, use this feedback to show that students are achieving these competencies. And I remember at the last summer workshop, I got kind of flummoxed by a question about competency, and Betty Farrell, who was there, and so she took the question for me, and she just was like, well, you could just have students demonstrate this. And it really caused me to reflect and rethink of, like, it doesn't have to be super complicated in how you're measuring or assessing competency. It's just like, do the students know the underlying evidence and evidence-based information, and can they apply it in their practice? And so I love using reflection for that. So go ahead, Dr. Lippy.
Yes, so there was a comment in the chat that someone was unable to open the document from the slides. I just want people to know that that Word document has been posted in the chat. So if you were not able to open the document through the link, it is there for you as we move through this next series.
And thank you. And just a reminder that, like, I have uploaded most of my assignments on the Faculty Corner webpage, so they're also there. And I kind of update. I have the strategy. I'm sure each of you also have a strategy for how you update your content every semester. So today the links are all to my most current assignments in the last semester. And as I said, if something doesn't work for you, feel free to drop me an email and I will send you my assignment, which you can modify for yourself. So if there's something that doesn't work, please know that you can reach out and get that information. All right, so then I also have a mini paper. This assignment takes place in a class, which I think is common to many RN-BSN programs. Ours is our transition to baccalaureate nursing education. In some schools, it's also called the professional socialization class. It's usually the first course that students take in the RN-BSN curricula. And so oftentimes this course will include an introduction to palliative care, where you can assess kind of what knowledge students already have and what knowledge they need. And so in my mini paper assignment, I have students reflect on their first experience as a nurse of caring for a dying patient. Sometimes students will say, well, I have a really memorable experience. Can I write about that? And other times students will ask if they can write about a family death experience. And I usually say, I encourage them, I want them to write about an experience where they were the nurse, not a family member, because it's just it's a different experience when you're being a nurse in the situation or a family member. And then in that assignment, I make sure that students can differentiate between palliative and hospice care. I have them read the American Nurses Association position statement, which just got updated last year. Nurses' roles and responsibility in providing care and support at the end of life. And I have them review the Hospice and Palliative Nurses Association position and value statements. And this does a few things. It's a writing assignment, which we all know that baccalaureate students need practice with their writing assignments and usually applying APA effectively. And then it gives them resources, the HPNA position and value statements. They know where they are. They know where they can go back and refer to those. And then a guiding document, the ANA position statement on what nurses are responsible for in providing support at the end of life. So those are great resources for students to have. It's a mini paper, so it's like a 3 to 5 page paper. And I give them if you are able to open the links, the first is the actual instructions, and then the second is a template for the paper. And so, I'm giving them a lot of support to how to write the short paper, share their experience, refer to the documents that are guiding end of life care, and then write effectively, hopefully. So that is that. And then the discussion forums versus reflection. I'd really love to hear people's feedback about this. Because it's pretty new to me. I mentioned I've been an educator since 2013. I've taught primarily online in most of that time since. So I feel like I have much more expertise in being an online instructor than an in-person instructor. And for every semester until last semester, I have employed discussion forums as a learning tool. But I did it in the fall for the first time. And that was caused by reading this blog article from the Scholarly Teacher, which is referenced right at the top here, Death to Online Discussion Boards, How AI is Making Discussion Boards Obsolete. And it's an interesting read. I encourage you to read it and form your own opinion. But basically their stance is, with the advent of AI, that students can just put into, whatever AI tool they're using, a discussion forum question, and get a fairly accurate, response. And I've always been had some concerns with discussion forums, in terms of, students are reading maybe an early poster and using that content themselves to form theirs. And so you get a lot of similar thinking. You don't get a lot of independent or novel thinking. And so for this semester, I moved away completely from discussion forums. And what I used instead is a reflection. And I may have used some of the same types of questions that I had previously used in a discussion forum, but it was a reflection. So it was an interaction between the student and myself as the instructor instead of the student and the class. And so these are just some examples of what I used. So, and all these examples come from a palliative care communication elective that I teach. So this isn't the transition to professional socialization course. This is a palliative care elective. Go ahead, Dr. Lippy.
No, finish your thoughts, because you said to have dialogue about it. So I have thoughts, but finish what you were going to say first. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so just some examples. Like this semester, I did something that I've never done before. Is I had students create a elevator speech or a public service announcement to explain the difference to a patient and their family between palliative and hospice care. And so what they were doing in their reply to me is I said that students could either reply in text. I said they could create a video. and they could supplement with an image. Sometimes it's really helpful, to show the palliative hospice continuum as an image to patients and families to help them understand. And it took the focus of like from just a knowledge-based question to how they were going to apply this in practice. So they were like pretending they were talking to a patient and family, and they were just sharing this with me. It was a really powerful tool because it not only demonstrated their knowledge of the difference between hospice and palliative care, but how they would communicate that effectively to a patient. And then another one is maybe talking about a communication mnemonic that they like. I also have I use a reflection of like, share your thoughts about whether it's okay to cry in front of a patient. And how you will deal with your emotions in that situation. And then this semester, and I have to say, I got all of these from the ELNIC faculty guides that Dr. Lippy and Dr. Davis have created. So those are such powerful tools for you to use when you're thinking about what can I do to develop this learning, you know, learning goal for this ELNIC module. So take a look at those faculty guides because they're filled with amazing resources. And there's one video in there, it's called It's Not About the Nail. And I have to admit, like the first time I watched this video, I thought, oh, that's kind of silly, because it's this woman that has a nail in her forehead, and she keeps on focusing something else, and her care provider is obviously focused on the nail. Um, but it was just I used it at the end of the course, and it was just a great way for students to reflect that, you know, what is important to the patient is what is important to the patient at that moment. Even though you're seeing something that could drastically change their care, that the patient may be focused on something else. And it was kind of lighthearted and silly. And it was fun, but they had great responses, and they talked about what communication skill they would use to kind of reply to that patient. So take a look at the faculty guides. If you're using discussion forums, maybe think about, using something else. Okay, Dr. Libby, go ahead.
Sure. So for those of you who maybe are new to our ELNIC world, if you're wondering what these faculty guides are, we have for each of the 6 modules for undergraduate and for graduate, we have a whole compendium of teaching strategies that have been curated by our team. And so what earlier in the chat, you'll see where faculty can request free access to the modules by emailing ELNIC. When you request that and we send you information about your access, we also send you the faculty guides. So that's how you get your hands on those. They are not just out on the website. Those you do request by getting access to the modules. So I wanted to let people know how they get those. But then also for discussion boards, you mentioned shifting. And I think, what I've learned about AI is reflection is a way to sort of get around, avoid some of the AI just doing their work for them. But I wonder, have you considered doing any video discussions where they have to record themselves and they have to speak their thoughts instead of just posting a written response? And then also, I know in Canvas, at least with discussions, you can have a setting where they must post first before they can see anybody else's responses. I'm curious if you've ever used that as a way to try to reduce them sort of just writing what somebody else has written.
Yeah, great question. So we use Moodle, and unfortunately, the way Moodle, and I tried this a few semesters ago, to prevent students from seeing other students post before they posted. And just the way that works technically in Moodle is you have to set up the discussion forum in a whole different way. And it's like, then everybody is responding to one thread, and it becomes students didn't like it. It becomes really difficult to use. And so that may just be a Moodle factor, but if that was in Canvas or Blackboard or any other learning platform that you could prevent students from seeing other students post before they post themselves, that is something I would definitely use. In my courses, but it just wasn't possible in Moodle. And then your other question, I forgot your first question, Megan.
Video, just if you
Oh,
can do
videos.
video response.
Thank you. So I always start my courses by having students do a video introduction of themselves. So we do kind of have this opportunity to, see a video of one another and introduce ourselves. I have not used a video for a demonstration of a skill, but actually, if you look at this last discussion point, for the forum, for the reflections, at the end of last term, I asked students to put on their creative educator hat and come up with some ideas. And I would say the majority of students shared that, oh, maybe you could do a simulation expert exercise, but of course you can't do that in an online environment. At least I haven't figured out yet how to do that. But one student did share this really cool idea for recording a video of themselves, so I might try that in a future course. And so I'd be interested if anyone else has figured out any way that they use videos in their course to, have students demonstrate their competencies in this area.
People are thinking, one thing that strikes me, especially like with your first option, is I wonder if you encourage students to leverage AI instead of avoiding it. So asking them to have AI generate an elevator speech or a public service announcement that explains the differences, but then the students in their reply, in their discussion, they have to critique it. Is it accurate? Is it appropriate for whatever audience? For them to sort of, instead of saying can't use AI, to make that, I always find if I can steer them into here's your parameters of AI use, it kind of gives them some permissibility in that space. But then you integrate a reflection on, okay, great, you used it, but is it good or not?
Right.
That might be
And
something.
I have to admit my own implicit bias of I've kind of been I want to avoid AI as much as I can, especially generative AI. And so I haven't done my part to embrace it and learn as much as I could about it, but um, I'm not sure if it's a fad or if it's here to stay. And so, giving it a little bit of time, but I have heard some people do things with AI that seem so creative and so great that like I'm not opposed to it, but just personally I'm like, oh, I'm so against AI on a personal level. So Dr. Davis, go ahead.
I just want to make sure this is like a hot topic. I just came back from AACN and it's always like standing room only. And I just want to make sure that you still have time to get through your slides because I think we could go down a rabbit hole of AI.
For sure, for sure. So yeah, so we'll come back to that and if there's more discussion. But for now, we'll move on. Another thing that I did for the first time this last fall in my palliative care communication class is I had students do a fast facts summary. So if you're not familiar with what fast facts are, they're like they're you can just Google fast facts and you'll come to the palliative care group of Wisconsin that publishes the fast facts, and there's over 500 of them now, and they're on all range of topics. And what they are is like a 1 to 2 page summary on a certain topic. So maybe a communication skill, or managing a certain type of symptom, or dealing with grief, or the provider role, self-care, any kind of topic that you can imagine. Um, and so I had students in each module, reflect on one of the fact summary. And what I asked them to do is for the first, when we were in the module on communication, I asked them to choose fast facts on communication and why did they choose that one? What were they interested in reading that fast facts? And then I wanted them to summarize the current best evidence on that topic, and that gets at the knowledge, like, are they learning the best evidence on this topic? And then I ask them, how are you going to apply this in your professional practice? Remember, all these students are out there working. They're oftentimes mostly new nurses, and they're learning all these skills to put in their toolbox at work. And so my focus is always on strengthening those skills that they can call up and use, and having them do a fast fact summary reminds them that if they're at work and they need to find some information on something of palliative care related, maybe symptom management of nausea or something, they can go to Fast Facts and find a quick read on that topic. So that has been another, and students loved my feedback at the end of the semester was very positive about this assignment, that students really appreciated this resource, and it was a great tool that they could see themselves using in the future. So then another assignment in my palliative care communication class that I do is another brief assignment. I do a book review, and I ask students to pick a nonfiction palliative care focused book. So that can be like Being Mortal by Atuel Gwande, or The Shift by Teresa Brown. Sorry, my cat is my cat is a little loud. And then they have to relate the book to the role of the palliative care nurse. And then I also have students do an advanced directive assignment where they look at advanced care planning resources, and they create an advanced directive for themselves. And those are usually great assignments. I will say I've taught this palliative care communication course probably 10 or 12 times in the last couple of years. And last semester was the first time that a student asked for an alternative assignment to the advanced care planning assignment, because she didn't feel comfortable with doing advanced directive for herself. And usually in that case, I would have a conversation with the student about, what their issue is with the assignment, and kind of counsel them through that. The student happened to ask on the day the assignment was due, and so at that point it was like there was no time to create alternative assignments. So I said, you can either do it or not, but you're going to be talking to patients about their own advanced directives. And I mean, I'm not asking students to codify their own advanced directive. They don't even have to sign it. It's just going through the process of looking at advanced care planning documents and seeing how they might be confusing to patients, and then thinking about their own wishes about their own end of life care, which can be threatening to patients and things like that. So
You muted, but Cheryl has her hand raised.
Oh, hi. I was going to say for a book, I recommended, and I put it in the chat as well, the book, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. But she also did it in a play form. So that would be, easier for maybe a semester. So, it's not as big, and not as long. And that way they could also, do reflections on, how that made them feel, and also just about how Joan herself, the character, also her feelings about what happened with her husband and in her family, that sort of thing, with the grief.
wonderful point, Cheryl. Yeah, and I encourage students, like I provide them with a list of potential books, but I encourage them, if they find a book that is of interest to them. Like one student a couple semesters ago found a book about grief practices from a perspective of Ireland, and so they wanted to read that because that was their heritage, and they wanted to read about that. And so I encourage students to, find a book and ask me about it, or use a book from the list. And I think one thing that I'm going to do in the future is I'm going to encourage students to select a book that is that addresses their needs. So I don't know if you have had this happen in your class, but I have a lot of students express like a pretty big anxiety or a fear of their own personal death. And so that prevents them from being able to communicate effectively with patients about their own attitudes and fears and values related to death. And so like in that case, I might recommend they consider reading Irving Yalom, who was a psychotherapist and writes about that fear of death, and so I mean, and I encourage students, they can listen to an audiobook, they can read a book online, they can go to their library, they don't have to buy a book. It just has to be a palliative care related book, that they can, reflect on palliative care, communication skills, and the role of the nurse in palliative care. And plus, like most of the students, when they take their elective course, they're pretty close to graduation and are RN-BSN students. And then we also have some traditional BSN students in that course, and they're getting ready to graduate usually that semester or the next. And it's a reminder, like at first some students are like, oh, why do I have to read a book? But in the course feedback, most students say they loved having a book assignment. They loved reading something that was more just for fun instead of a textbook or something. And it kind of reminds them of, there's a lot of great stuff out there to read and learn about. So yeah, great points. Thank you, Cheryl. So I will add the Year of Magical Thinking to my book list. So, and then this probably maybe I should have mentioned earlier, but if Andrea, you could add this link. I include in the palliative care, in my palliative care communication class, trauma-informed statement. And basically in that course, students watch a lot of videos, and then they reflect and do the fast fact summaries and the book review and the advanced directive. And so it's a deep class and it's 7 weeks, so it's compressed. And so I always, warn students that some of this content may be strong and may be, difficult to watch. But I believe students are encountering these situations in real life. And so these learning tools can sometimes be helpful. But I do include this trauma-informed statement, and every module, I do a brief introduction and I say, okay, in this module, you're going to watch, this video, maybe extremists, or maybe a palliative care documentary about pediatric palliative care. And I warn them, if it's a strong video and if they start to watch it and they have any trauma that comes up, I give them instructions. Stop the assignment, reach out to your instructor before you proceed. If you need an immediate help, here's our, resource to our 24/7 counseling hotline. And I think that's important to have. A few years ago, I had one student where a particular video really triggered a lot of memories of her father's death, which was a not great experience. And she really had quite a strong reaction. And, we had the chance, she immediately, at first she was like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And then we had a chance to kind of talk about it. And she realized it was more of her experience, and she could have reflected on that a little differently. But I just feel like since that experience, I always want to give students ample warning when something might be emotionally provoking for them. So let's see. I think oh my goodness, it's 11:50 already. So this is a good time for some questions and discussions and comments, but I do want to remind you first that the ELNIC Faculty Corner, you may have, if you haven't done so already, you may have to request access to ELNIC to get those faculty guides. So so please do that. And if pay attention to the AACN and the ELNIC newsletters, because the summer workshop application should be coming out in probably January. And if you haven't attended the workshop yet, I would definitely recommend applying to do that. And I encourage you, like Miss Frizzle, take chances with trying new assignments in your courses and see how they work and keep experimenting. So I'm open for questions or comments or feedback.
Yes, so we'll spend about 5 more minutes on questions, and then in the last few, Dr. Davis and I want to share the faculty corner with everyone. So when you, so you can see that information and also where the information about the workshop lives. Cheryl, you have your hand raised.
Hey, I just want to say I recommend also When Breath Becomes Air by Dr. Paul Kalanithi. That's a great one as well. And, it's not, God, I finished it in 2 days, but that's another good book for an assignment.
Yeah, that's a popular one, and a lot of students will select that one because it's the perspective of a healthcare provider who then faces their own very serious illness diagnosis and what that's like. So a lot of students have interest in that book.
In the chat, Andrea just posted a link where we are curating a list of individuals who want to be first notified when the application for the workshop goes live. So if you're interested in being on that list to get that early announcement, go ahead and fill out that. It's a very short form, but it makes sure you get on our list and we can notify you when our application goes live in just a few weeks. But Andrew, do you want to drive to the corner? And before we do that, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Glover, for this incredible presentation. So many wonderful strategies that has my gears turning for sure, and things that I can do even with other student populations. So thank you so very much. And then also just want to, because I can, say happy birthday to Dr. Davis. So just want everyone to, you don't have to sing, we're not going to do that, but just if everyone wants to send her a little celebration emoji, because it is webinar, it is a webinar day and it's also her birthday, and she's going to hate me for that, but I don't care. So now.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm going to turn on my mic because it's going to make you echo and you're going to stop talking about that. But thank you. You're right. I just don't, I'm very shy about things like that. Anyway, you should be able to see the faculty corner. And one of the, a couple important points about the workshop next summer is, the intention is to really bring together faculty that are sort of, navigating this either at a curricular level, how do we do this and integrate it into our program, or I want more tools to help, build my skill set. But it's really intended to be for folks that this isn't necessarily your wheelhouse. But we want to help you understand ways that we all should be integrating this education. And that's to the point about the faculty guides as well, is if it's not your wheelhouse, there's all kinds of resources to support you. But also important about the workshop is that it's grant funded, so it is an application process. But we will, if you can get yourself to Portland, Oregon, which is where it is, we will house you in our dorms and feed you, and the registration is covered. So that might be a little bit more enticing. I know there are some people on the call that have been to that previously, and I think that it really might help kind of get you started, or meet you where you're at on that journey and help you move forward. I also saw in the chat some really rich ideas about strategies that were being used, and we're really trying to model sharing this out with each other. So you see at the bottom of the webpage, If you write down here, call for submissions. If you have a teaching strategy, and Dr. Glover mentioned that hers that she shared today, many of them are on the website. We encourage you to do that, and we will add them to this teaching and or evaluation section of the web page, and you can add it to your CV as professional service or some such way, however you do that, to contribute to your profession. We have past webinars and upcoming webinars. Maybe you all know this link where you signed up. And some of I think one of the early slides had reference to CARES, the CARES document. Those are all here. Access to the curriculum is here, and once again, it's free to faculty, and you will get those faculty guides if you want to review. And you know, it's free to anyone that might be contemplating using some of those within their teaching. So share that out with your faculty. And I think with that, I'll just mute again.
Actually, will you click on the workshop web page, which is in the next box down, where you can get to the area. So there is a dedicated page now for the workshop, which gives you information. I also just put in the chat a document we have that's a one-page summary of all of our faculty resources, plus the workshop flyer. If you scroll down towards the bottom, we also have a reel of photos. So those, I see some familiar names and faces in our audience today of workshop attendees. So you might find yourself in the photo reel from the last 2 years. So I encourage you to check that website out if you want to know more. One other thing we haven't mentioned yet is faculty get free access to pretty much everything. We want you to use the resources. And if you are not currently using the modules, the cost for students is $29 per student for 12 months of access. And then there is tiered pricing. So for 2 years, it's $49. For 3 years, it's $69. So it's not a double cost. It's a little bit of a reduced rate for 2 years. So, you know, the feedback we hear is it's pretty affordable for students. And then also we encourage schools to use the modules where those best fit for your program. We are not at all prescriptive of saying you must put communication in this course. You know where the content might already live or where it might fit best. And so encourage you to integrate it where it makes the most sense for your program, for your students, for your curriculum. But again, the website there shows you how to get information.
And a quick note that even though it says here $29 for 12 months, there is tiered pricing. You can find out more about that. If you really see integration over 2 years, there's a different pricing. I think $49 for 2 years access. So there's more options.
Well, we will end here. Thank you all for joining us again. It's finals week where I'm at. I don't know if it's finals week where you are. And so this final starts for grading and all of those things. We so greatly appreciate you taking the time out to join us. And wherever you are, we wish you a safe and happy holiday season. We hope you get some rest because I know we all get really tired, just like our students do. So hope you take some time to rest. And again, thank you, Tony, so very much for sharing with us your wisdom and expertise in teaching an online RN-BSN programs. Tony will be joining us as faculty next summer. So if you want to see her more,
Thank you. Happy holidays.